He could have been a simple bartender or accountant, but he became the most notorious gangster in history and owes his rise to the 14-year-old Prohibition that affected America in the first half of the 20th century. He represents the classic portrait of the American gangster. He appeared out of nowhere and became notorious overnight, born ignorant, but shaved to gain access to certain circles, starting from the small hens and reaching the highest levels of society, from commissioner to political blackmailer, listening, learning, evolving, and ultimately taking that fatal step. Alphonse Capone's case is interesting not only because of his personal history but also because he served as a role model for other mafia bosses, an icon of corrupt and violent America. It's that villain whose fame has come to rival that of the legendary Babe Ruth in baseball. He was even named Man of the Year by Time magazine. A man who had the power to manipulate at the highest level and who educated and infiltrated an entire generation of criminals from all walks of life. Nicknamed Scarface, due to the scars on his face from a violent confrontation, and the Big Fellow, due to his position in the Mafia, from his position as leader of the Chicago outfit gang, Al Capone ruled the Underworld in Chicago, a group to be feared among organized crime networks that thrived on social vices, gambling, alcohol, and brothels. Protection fees and competition between gangs often lead to bloody conflicts, armed attacks, and street executions. But such events have been the order of the day in most major American metropolises since the turn of the last century, caused by the influx of immigrants from all over the world, who were put on the line as easily and quickly as possible. In 1913 alone, 1 million immigrants arrived on the East Coast: Irish, Jews, Greeks, Italians. The most feared were the Irish, who had already taken over the suburbs, demanding protection fees. The Italians, who came later, were considered low-class people, for which they were marginalized and had access only to the lowest-paid jobs. In New York, terrorized by such bloody rivalries, Capone, Alphonse Gabriel, was born. He is the first of Gabriel and Teresina's 9 children born on American soil, and he is the descendant of a small family of Italians who landed in Brooklyn in January 1899. It's hard to imagine how so many people could live under the same roof in a modest 3-room apartment on Navy Street, number 95, without furniture and a bathroom, supported by a butcher's and a tailor's income. Growing up with all sorts of shortcomings and frustrations, Alphonse quickly sought to make sense of it. At the age of 14, he knew all the streets, shortcuts, and hiding places in Brooklyn by heart and commissioned small illegal cliques, taking dirty money from one side of the neighborhood to the other. He was able to recoup a portion of the money lost by local crook Johnny Torrio during one confrontation, which was enough to make him stand out. Things became considerably more dangerous when he was joined by a lieutenant from the 5 Points Gang, which is named after the 5 crossroads in Manhattan where 5 vital streets converge. Here he was initiated into the underground business by Pope Johnny Torrio, also known as Fox or Immune, who had opened a billiard club as a screen for usury, sports betting, and prostitution. But when he decided to prospect the Chicago market, Al was sent to work in the bar of another Coney Island thief, Frankie Yale, who was also a professional killer. Fearful of his new boss, Capone preferred to do his job and not upset anyone. It's just that, during an unfortunate conflict with a client, he ended up with his face and neck cut off by a shale. And when the bartender's salary turned out to be insufficient for a young man with family aspirations, he asked Frankie to give him different tasks. He also learned from him what intimidation, cold blood, and cruelty mean. Capone was just 19 years old when he killed his first victim, a criminal from whom he had to recover some money for Frankie. He was shocked at what he could do, even though necessity had driven him to such an act, and he was not yet ready for such a life. So he soon left New York, finding a job as an accountant for a Baltimore construction company. There he also became the head of the family, marrying the beautiful and elegant Irish woman, May Coughlin, a few weeks after the birth of their son, Albert Francis, Sonny. Invited to the baptism, his mentor, Johnny Torrio, offered him financial support and launched an invitation to follow him to Chicago. Initially, the young family relocated to Baltimore. Still, after Senior Capone died in 1920 from a stroke, Al chose to go to Chicago. We are talking about a critical period in the United States, when the U.S. Congress had already voted on October 28, 1919, despite President Woodrow Wilson's veto of the Volstead Act, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and exchange of other goods, transportation, and supply of beverages with an alcohol content greater than 0.5%. Born in the heyday of the temperance movement, which campaigned against alcohol consumption, considered the source of evil in society, Prohibition ushered in a strange and turbulent era in the United States, the paradoxical effect of which was to increase alcohol consumption. Cocktail parties have become a stopped and even more coveted pleasure. And the merchants knew how to reshape themselves, opening a lot of clandestine bars in the basements or on the premises that operated under the camouflage of harmless ice cream parlors or ceilings. The goods came from equally clandestine factories, often run by uninitiated or dishonest producers, who often supplied the black market with counterfeit beverages made from dubious and dangerous ingredients. By the time Capone arrived in Chicago, there were already several smuggling groups fighting to grab as much of the clandestine liquor market as possible. The main mafias involved were the Irish and the Italian Mafia. As Torrio's right-hand man in the outfit group, Capone quickly set up an illegal alcohol distribution network, generating a wave of violence that the city had never known before. In fact, he had been loyal to his godfather, Johnny Torrio, when he contributed to the assassination of his boss, Big Jim Colosimo, also known as Diamond Jim, a Calabrian married to a matron and the owner of a network of 200 brothels, but who did not want to enter into the illegal alcohol trade. Capone's violent start was as necessary to the outfit's business as it was compromising. "You have a mind, an ambition, and you are not afraid of anything," Torrio used to say. But to do business with important people, you have to be like them. So Torrio tailored Capone to the people he came in contact with. He introduced him to the world of lawyers, judges, businessmen, and politicians, and he taught him how to look like them, how to talk like them, and even how to walk like them. "Bribes, not bullets," Torrio repeated. That's how Al Capone came to wear the latest fashion, trois-piece suits, often in stripes, with pronounced lapels and a handkerchief, lavatory ties, a hat, and the indispensable cigar. In private, he prefers pajamas and silk robes. And because his waist was gradually changing, the tailor was always busy. Al was quite full-bodied, being an avid consumer of pasta, Coca-Cola, but also Chinese food. In fact, he is said to have been a loyal customer of the Italian restaurant Emile, but also of a local in Chinatown, One Cow. And in each frequented pub, he had his own special table, from which he did not bother to pick up anyone who occupied it when he entered accompanied by acolytes. He didn't do sports at all. He had only learned to play golf to make it easier for him to attract businessmen to his side. He liked the beard, roulette, fishing, and opera music the most. "For me, opera is like the icing on the cake," he joked. But just as he believed that his transformation was complete and that he had found a warm place, settling his family in a one-story villa in the Park Manor neighborhood, which he had bought for $15,000 in 1923, Al was forced to retreat to the nearby town of Cicero with the arrival of the new mayor, William Emmett Dever, who had started an anti-mafia war. But Cicero was not a free zone either, being the territory of the O'Donnell brothers. Bloodthirsty, with the murder of 200 people, the Irish group had to give way to the outfit gang. A deal that Capone had also concluded in his primary, brutal, and rude style, which Torrio stubbornly fined. The Godfather saw things differently. He wanted to respect that classic codex of the Italian Mafia, with the division of spheres of influence, chivalry between bandits, and observance of the law of silence, a vision that forced him to withdraw from the organized crime unit. Capone, however, was hard to string. He was impulsive, ruthless, and radical. Even at the next local election in Chicago, when he wanted to impose a mafia-like candidate, his people assaulted voters at the polls. And after the new mayor was installed in the promised chair and dared to declare war on the gangsters, Capone had no hesitation in breaking into the town hall and throwing him up the stairs. After this show of strength, the Chicago outfit had no obstacle to claiming its supremacy. Who cares about suffering? Whoever stole from them died instantly. And, as a last-ditch gesture, Capone always sent flowers to the funerals of rival clans. He once spent $5,000 on such courtesy. His most feared enemies were the Irishman, Dion O'Banion, who had also put a $50,000 prize on his head, and Bugs Moran, George Clarence, a great thorn in the side, who ran his business in the North. Obviously, the mafias of different colors competed with each other, their gold mine being Chicago and the surrounding area, that is, an area of 45 kilometers by 25 kilometers with 2 million souls, many of whom drank beer and whiskey. Transportation often came from Canada via Detroit but was often hijacked by rivals, and the trade dispute turned into a veritable vendetta, maintaining the city's state of war, Chicago gaining fame as the city of gangsters. According to estimates, the income from brothels, gambling, protection fees, and the diversion of illegal alcohol shipments by other smugglers amounted to $100 million annually, the equivalent of $1.4 billion today. A devastating effect of the law of Prohibition, which Al Capone had used to become a true symbol. His biggest mistake was the bloody event of February 14, 1929, which went down in history as the Valentine's Day Massacre. That morning, several outfit members disguised as police officers descended on a warehouse belonging to rival Bugs Moran under the pretext of a raid. Moran's 7 men, who were just unloading a shipment of whiskey, were lined up on the wall and executed. The images of the bodies found by the police also reached the press, horrifying public opinion. So what Capone wanted in revenge for the trouble caused by Moran's North Side gang turned into a real mission for the authorities to get rid of this enemy of the state. But where to find an honest and dedicated agent, immune to financial incentives or threats from the outfit, who will gather evidence against Capone and bring him to justice? The police had a special department at the time, called the Prohibition Bureau, under the umbrella of 12 agents who called themselves Untouchables, the zealous chief of whom was Eliot Ness. The mission was not at all easy, since Capone had taken care to erase all traces and camouflage his sources of revenue through some antique shops or laundries, thus the term money laundering. But recordings, interceptions of alcohol shipments, and raids on illegal distilleries and clandestine bars soon paid off, weakening Capone's influence. And in 1931, the little girl was found for whom she could be sued, tax evasion. Initially, the defendant believed that he could make a deal with the prosecutor's office for only 2 years in prison, which would have meant, at the same time, 2 years of guaranteed protection. Numerous attempts at bribery and intimidation had no effect, with the Italian receiving an 11-year sentence. After a long and complicated trial, he was imprisoned in 1932 in the Atlanta Penitentiary, then transferred to Alcatraz, the newest maximum security institution of that time, located on an island in the San Francisco Bay, from which he was unable to escape. Detained. And while the former mafia boss had begun to lose his mind within the cold walls of the cell, due to acute withdrawal from cocaine deficiency and pre-incarcerated neurosyphilis, outfit lost his supremacy with the repeal of the ban law. Since 1933. It is true that Frank Nitti, Capone's right-hand man who remained the boss in his place, had tried to get the clan back on track, but Chicago was no longer fertile ground for shady business. So Nitti went into the light, choosing to tickle the Hollywood film industry, enslaving studios like Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox. Interestingly, in 1939, when he was released on parole, Capone was no longer. He did not recognize any faces from his past. He was weak, with a shattered psyche, and had manic depressive seizures. For a time, he was hospitalized in Baltimore. But too much could not be done for him, even though he was one of the first patients to be treated for syphilis with penicillin. He spent his last years in the sumptuous villa on Palm Island, Florida, which he had bought in 1928. He often spoke alone and believed that the Bolsheviks were the new plague in the world and that Bugs Moran was still on his trail. After a long agony, his struggle with insanity was ended by a stroke, followed by pneumonia, which ended at the age of only 48 on January 25, 1947. In a letter to his son, Sonny, he wrote, "I only ask you one thing, forget what Al Capone was, and remember your father as someone who loved you and only wanted the best for you.